The laughter was the last thing she heard before the door slammed shut. It echoed off the marble walls of the law office hallway, sharp and brittle, like something snapping just beneath the skin. Naomi Henderson stood motionless outside the double doors, a key dangling from her fingers, still warm from the lawyer's hand. One key. No deed. No title. Just this. Behind her, the air smelled of old mahogany and powdered perfume. In front of her, the rain waited like consequence. Her belly pressed tightly against her coat, 7 months heavy with life. Beside her, her son Elijah, 10 years old and trying hard not to look scared, clutched the fraying hem of her sleeve. He glanced up once, hopeful, maybe, and she offered him the only thing she had left: composure. They walked in silence. Past the polished elevator, past the glass cases holding plaques with names that were no longer hers, out through the revolving door that spat them onto wet concrete like they had been exhaled from something too grand to hold their sorrow. The sky sagged under the weight of gray. Water traced cracks in the sidewalk. Naomi did not flinch when the chill slid past her collar. She welcomed it. At least it was honest. They rounded the corner of the funeral home, their shoes slapping against the pavement. And there it was. The van. A 1981 Ford Econoline, hunched like a relic no one wanted to claim. Its sides mottled with rust, one headlight missing, and a bumper held by willpower and duct tape. It sat beneath a leaning street lamp that flickered as though debating whether the scene was worth illuminating. Elijah stared at it. "This can't be it," he said softly. Naomi ran a hand along the passenger side panel. The rust came off in flakes, settling in her palm like ashes. She said nothing. Words were currency she could not afford to spend on disbelief. She opened the door. A sigh escaped from inside the van. Old leather, damp fabric, forgotten oil, and wrapped around them like the past. Elijah climbed in first. He traced the cracked dashboard, each fracture telling a story neither of them had lived yet. Naomi sat slowly, one hand bracing her back. She rested the key in the cup holder and looked out the windshield. Rain had begun to fall, thick and methodical. It drummed against the glass, muting the rest of the world. Her hands rested on her belly. The child kicked, strong and sure. Outside, a couple walked past the van, paused, whispered. "That's her," one of them said. "The widow. They took everything from her, left her with a junkyard ghost." Naomi's jaw tensed. Her shoulders did not. She watched the raindrops race down the window, colliding, separating, merging again. She listened to Elijah hum quietly as he pulled a blanket from their single suitcase. The van's interior lights flickered once, then surrendered. Night gathered like a verdict. By dawn, the city had washed itself clean. The sky was bone pale. Naomi stepped outside. Mist clung to her braids. Her coat smelled faintly of mildew and rose water. She walked the length of the van, running her fingers along the seams. At the rear corner, just beneath the license plate, she noticed something unusual. A patch where the rust had curled back like peeling wallpaper. She dug at it absently. A flake came loose, exposing a sliver of something. Smoother. Not paint. Not steel. She pressed harder. Another curl of rust fell away. Beneath it, gold. A dull shimmer, muted but unmistakable. Not the showy kind, but the kind buried in time. Dense. Quiet. Waiting. Naomi blinked. Her breath fogged in the air. Behind her, Elijah stirred inside the van, muttering in his sleep. She looked at the golden vein again, then reached for the rag tucked into her coat pocket. Gently, she wiped the area clean. The metal underneath was unmarked, untouched by years or weather. She did not smile, not yet. She stepped back, letting the cold settle over her shoulders. The baby shifted inside her, as if sensing something had changed. Naomi pressed her hand against the panel, felt its weight, its promise. Then she whispered, to no one and everyone, "Let them think it's worthless." She picked up the rag and covered the gold again. Not yet. Let silence be the soil where something greater could take root. The market opened with the groan of rusted shutters and the clink of early coins. Naomi walked among the crates of bruised apples and yesterday's bread with her son's hand in hers, her coat cinched tightly against the wind. It was not cold enough for frost, but the kind of chill that made your joints whisper with age, even if your bones were still young. Vendors eyed her with a mix of pity and distance. Not hostile, just absent. The way people look past a woman who has clearly lost too much. Elijah kept close, his shoulders hunched forward even as he pretended not to care. Naomi approached a corner stall run by a man in a faded red vest. "Any bread left?" He looked her over, then nodded toward a box near the edge of his table. "3 for $1. Day old." She paid with coins pulled from a glass jar in her pocket. He watched her palm as if measuring how long that jar might last. They sat on a bench beneath a shuttered pharmacy to eat. Quiet bites. Crusts chewed slowly to make them last. Naomi did not speak. Elijah did not ask questions. That silence between them had become a language of its own. Across the street, a young florist opened her shop. Naomi's eyes followed her hands, swift, confident, looping ribbons around fresh lilies with a kind of joy that felt almost reckless. She used to be that woman. Naomi looked down at her own fingers, red from the wind, calloused from days scrubbing the van. The gold she'd uncovered 2 nights ago haunted her, but not with greed, with questions. Why hide it? Why only in the van? Why leave her this and nothing else? That night, after Elijah had curled up on the van's back bench, Naomi lit the small battery lantern they'd salvaged from the hardware store dumpster. She opened a notebook she'd rescued from her husband's desk drawer, the only paper she'd had the sense to grab before they threw her out. On the first page, a sketch of the van, drawn in pencil. Her husband's handwriting circled several panels with codes and arrows. No explanation. Just this note scrawled in the margin. If you ever need to start again, look beneath what they'd never dare value. She traced the letters slowly, letting the meaning sink through the noise of memory. He knew. He had always known. But he also knew they would take everything from her, except what they could not see. She shut the notebook, her hands trembling. Her husband had not left her a van. He had left her a vault in disguise, and no one knew but her. The next morning, she sent Elijah to the library with a stack of picture books and a promise she would meet him in an hour. Alone, she returned to the van and climbed into the back, where the walls still smelled faintly of motor oil and sweat. She worked quietly, stripping back another patch of rust along the inner doorframe. Beneath the corroded surface, a familiar gleam met her gaze. She pried gently, careful not to make noise. A long, narrow strip loosened, thicker than plating. Heavy. Gold, yes. Pure and dull, shaped not like jewelry, but like insulation. Paneling. Reinforcement. It ran deeper than she thought. Her pulse climbed, but her expression remained still. She wrapped the strip in old cloth and hid it beneath a seat compartment, then resealed the rust as best she could using bits of mud and old paint flakes. To anyone walking past, the van was still a shell. Still worthless. By noon, she walked 5 blocks to a pawn shop she remembered her husband warning her about. The kind that asked no questions, the kind that weighed everything, even silence. The clerk behind the glass was old, maybe 70, with a face lined like folded linen. He eyed her swollen belly and the wrapped cloth. "What's that?" "Metal," she said. He unwrapped it, eyes narrowing. "You get this from a salvage yard?" Naomi said nothing. He studied her, then the metal, then her again. "How much you want?" "Enough for food, gas, and 1 coat that fits." He nodded once. No more questions. He understood the economy of pain. She left with 220s, enough to buy Elijah winter boots and 2 pairs of socks thick enough to fold over. That night, they dined on warm rice from a corner kitchen and steamed carrots that made Elijah's face light up like something sacred. She told him they would stay in the van a little longer, just until something opened up. He asked no further questions. He had learned from her that trust was quieter than doubt. In the weeks that followed, Naomi worked in shadows. She cleaned buildings in the early hours, arranged discarded flowers into makeshift bouquets that she sold near the courthouse at lunch. She bartered leftover pastries for shampoo, never asked for help, never let her eyes linger too long on anyone who pitied her. All the while the van sat in its corner lot, peeling in plain sight, its secret sealed beneath grime and time. And inside Naomi, something began to grow alongside the child. Resolve. Not sharp, not loud, but rooted. Like the kind of tree that bends in storms yet never breaks. On the 32nd night, while Elijah slept, she stepped out beneath the stars, the city dim behind her. She looked at the van. Still ugly. Still quiet. She placed a hand on its side, then whispered to the night air, "You are not my grave. You are my beginning." And the wind, for once, did not feel cold. The rain returned without warning, thin at first, like breath on glass, then steady, like memory. Naomi wiped her hands on the hem of her coat as she stepped out from the corner deli, a paper bag tucked beneath her arm, warm from the loaf inside. Elijah skipped beside her, boots finally snug on his feet. The groceries were light, but still enough to require choices: rice or soap, eggs or bus fare. She chose bread and the feeling of warmth between her palms. The van was parked beneath a flickering sign at the edge of an abandoned lot. No one noticed it anymore. It had faded into the landscape like a crack in the sidewalk, present, familiar, invisible. Inside, the air was dry for once. Naomi had patched the leak above the passenger door using a tarp she'd traded for sweeping out a laundromat. Elijah had used a broken crayon to draw stars across the ceiling, yellow on pale rust. It looked like hope pretending not to be. As she unpacked the bread, her eyes caught the side panel again, the one that had gleamed weeks ago beneath rust and lies. She had stopped prying. Not because the gold was gone, but because the urgency had shifted. The secret was not in what the van held. It was in what it allowed. Space. Shelter. Silence. She tucked the bread away and reached for her notebook. The pages were now filled with lists: vendors, suppliers, corner stalls, flower types, ribbon costs. The handwriting was tight, controlled, calculated hope. And at the top of every page, circled in red ink, Isa and Rose. She had decided. It began that weekend, when she returned to the morning market with a mason jar of daisies, wild, imperfect, beautiful in a way that store flowers never were. She stood at a folding table on the corner, her son seated cross-legged beside her with a cardboard sign that read, "Fresh flowers, arranged with care." Some people passed without looking, others slowed, a few smiled. By noon, 3 bouquets were gone. By sundown, a woman with silver hair and sad eyes returned for another. "Who taught you to arrange like that?" the woman asked. Naomi's answer was soft. "My husband. We built a shop once, before it was taken." The woman did not ask by whom. Her silence was graceful. "Well, I hope you build it again." Naomi nodded, but said nothing. Words made promises. She had none to spare. Each morning after, she returned to the same corner. She brought more flowers, built her display from borrowed crates and thrifted cloth. Elijah handed out hand-drawn cards with the name Isa and Rose printed in pencil, his letters shaky but proud. The name spread slowly, like perfume in still air. Have you seen the new florist? She's quiet, kind. Her boy's always smiling. Arrangements are lovely. Not cheap, but worth every cent. Whispers filled the space Naomi once occupied with worry. By week 3, the old shop owner from Carter Floral passed by. She stared for a moment, recognition flickering behind her lashes, but she said nothing, just walked on. Naomi did not look up. That night, Naomi opened the hidden compartment in the van once more. From behind the worn panel, she drew out another bar, shorter, rougher around the edges. She wrapped it in a brown scarf, then slipped out beneath the cover of rain. The same jeweler met her with a glance and no questions. "You have more?" Naomi shook her head. "One is enough for now." The payout was smaller this time, but it was enough for what mattered. The next day, she bought a permit for a market stall. Legitimate. Visible. It terrified her. Not because she feared being seen, but because it meant permanence. She scrubbed the inside of the van that night until her knuckles ached. Elijah watched from his blanket, sketching new sign designs in the condensation on the window. "You think we'll have a real shop someday?" he asked. Naomi did not answer right away. Instead, she folded a dishcloth in half, then again, her motions precise. Then she said, "Not someday. Soon." And for the first time, she let herself believe it. The next morning, beneath a sky streaked with violet and gold, Naomi unlocked the tiny market stall on Birch and Monroe, a square of concrete and corrugated tin tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. She hung a cloth sign across the front, hand-stitched in soft green, Isa and Rose, blooms with purpose. She placed the first bouquet in a chipped vase, adjusted the ribbon, and stepped back. It was small, fragile even, but it was hers. A woman approached, clutching a wedding binder and looking lost. She paused at the stall, her eyes scanning the arrangements. Naomi straightened her shoulders and waited. The woman smiled. "You do custom?" Naomi returned the smile, quiet but steady. "I do meaningful." The woman laughed. "Even better." As they spoke, Naomi caught a glimpse of her reflection in the glass of the bookstore window. Her coat still worn, her hair pulled tight, her posture calm. No one would see gold, but they would see her. And for the first time in months, that was enough. The wind swept in from the north that morning, crisp and clean like something newly sharpened. Naomi adjusted the flower buckets near the edge of her stall, tucking eucalyptus stems beneath a linen wrap to keep them from curling in the dry air. Around her, the market bustled, a symphony of morning voices, shoe soles on pavement, laughter, and the occasional impatient car horn. But inside her stall, there was a kind of stillness, a sanctuary made from petals and purpose. Elijah sat on a stool near the cash tin, sketching again. Today it was tulips with impossible colors, blue, orange, even silver. Naomi let him draw. She understood that hope, too, had to be practiced. Across the street, 2 men in dark coats leaned against a bench, talking in low tones. One of them gestured toward the stall. The other narrowed his eyes and shook his head. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. But she said nothing. Instead, she arranged a cluster of white peonies, wrapping them in craft paper and tying the bundle with twine. A woman approached, eyes rimmed red. "For my sister," the woman said softly. She just lost someone. Naomi handed her the bouquet without a word, slipping in a single stem of lavender. Comfort without noise. That was her way. By mid-afternoon, the rhythm of the market shifted. Shadows stretched across the pavement. The bakery closed early. A city official passed by, clipboard in hand, pausing briefly to glance at her permit before moving on. That evening, Naomi packed the unsold bouquets with care, setting the flowers gently into water jars in the back of the van. She wrapped leftover stems into smaller bunches, thank you gifts for vendors who had shared space or kindness. Her hands worked from memory now, not habit. There was a difference. When she slid behind the wheel of the van, she caught her reflection in the side mirror. The fatigue was there, yes, but so was something else. Something carved from persistence. She drove 2 blocks out of her way that night to drop one of the small bundles on the steps of the bookstore owner who had offered her old crates on her first day. No name, no card, just flowers. Kindness, too, could bloom unseen. Back in the lot, she parked beneath the familiar leaning lamppost, the same one that flickered like a tired eye. She stepped out, breathing deep. The van's shadow stretched long across the asphalt, touching the sidewalk where the first leaf of autumn had fallen. Inside, Elijah slept curled in his blanket, soft snores escaping through parted lips. Naomi reached into the seat compartment and retrieved another cloth-wrapped strip, smaller than the others. She hesitated, not because of the gold, but because each piece removed made the van lighter, less burdened, but also less rooted. She turned it in her hands beneath the glow of the streetlight, the weight familiar now, almost comforting. Her husband's voice echoed somewhere deep in memory. If everything else falls apart, this will not. But something had shifted. She was no longer clinging to the gold. She was building without it. Still, she took it. And in the morning, she traded it, quietly, for the first month's rent on a storefront. It was tucked between a tax office and a nail salon. The windows were dusty, and the inside smelled of plaster and glue. But it had 4 walls, a lock, and the faint echo of possibility. The landlord handed her the keys without ceremony. "You're sure you want this place?" he asked. "It's not much." Naomi looked past him, through the dirty window panes. "I am not looking for much," she said. "Just enough to grow something true." She spent the next 3 days cleaning. Elijah helped scrub the floor with a mop 2 sizes too big. They painted the walls a soft, mossy green using donated cans from a home renovation center. Naomi worked from sunrise to near midnight. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. The baby turned restlessly, reminding her with each kick that time was growing short. On the 4th day, she brought in a single table, borrowed from a church basement, and placed it in the center of the shop. On it, she arranged 1 vase. Not full, just 3 stems. A white peony, a stem of rosemary, a sprig of baby's breath, memory, strength, hope. The next day, she opened the doors. No balloons, no grand sign, just her and Elijah behind the counter. A cash tin tucked between them and a handmade Ice and Rose sign hanging crooked in the window. At noon, the same silver-haired woman from the market appeared at the door. She paused, took in the clean walls, the scent of fresh-cut florals. Her eyes softened. "You made it real," she whispered. Naomi nodded once. "It was always real," she replied. "Now it just has a home." By evening, Naomi sat on the front step of the shop, her legs stretched in front of her, ankles swollen, hands covered in floral dust. She watched the street. People walked past, some curious, some indifferent. She did not care. She had opened something that could not be closed. Behind her, the walls held stories, not of wealth, not of revenge, but of something deeper, earned peace. Elijah came out with 2 cups of warm tea and sat beside her. "Do you think Dad would be proud?" Naomi took a slow sip before answering. "I think he knew this day would come. That is why he left us that van." Elijah frowned. "You mean the gold?" Naomi smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I mean the wheels." Because what she had needed most was not wealth. It was motion. And motion, quiet, steady, unshakable, had carried her to this moment. The bell above the door rang like a whisper. Not loud, not urgent, but present. Naomi looked up from the arrangement she was trimming near the window. Outside, the sky was slate gray. Rain on its way again. Inside, the scent of eucalyptus and freesia floated through the air like memory. The man who entered wore a suit 2 seasons too old. His tie was crooked, his shoes well polished but weathered at the seams. He stood just past the doorway, his gaze scanning the walls, the counter, the single-framed photo near the register. Naomi, Elijah, and the newborn baby, her tiny hand curled around her brother's thumb. The man did not speak at first. Neither did Naomi. She simply set down her scissors, wiped her palms on her apron, and waited. Finally, he cleared his throat. "You are Naomi Henderson?" "I am." He took a step forward, his eyes flicking toward the sign behind her. Isa and Rose, blooms with purpose. "I used to work at Carter Floral," he said. "Before everything." Naomi nodded once, slowly. He hesitated, then added, "They are selling the last location. Bankruptcy auction. Word is your name came up." Naomi's fingers curled slightly around the edge of the counter. "Why would it?" she asked. He shrugged. "Some say you built half of it. Others say you built more than that." A pause. "They never learned your value until it was gone." Naomi's breath remained even. "And you?" He met her gaze for the first time. "I always knew." He left a business card and walked out into the drizzle. Naomi stared at the small rectangle of cardstock for a moment, then slipped it beneath the register. She did not need him to say more. The ruins of what had been stolen were now soil for what she was becoming. Later that week, Naomi stood before the glass doors of the auction house, her newborn daughter nestled in a wrap across her chest. The infant slept soundly, unaware of the tension that vibrated beneath her mother's calm. Inside, the room smelled of ink and ego. Polished men in overcoats sat with their bidding cards half raised, eyes flicking toward projected values. Naomi sat in the back row, hands folded over her belly, jaw set. The Carter flagship store came up fourth on the docket, lot 114. Once her pride, then her punishment. Now her possibility. The bidding started low, lower than she expected. A few hands raised, fast and careless. They were not serious buyers, just vultures. One man laughed quietly when the auctioneer reminded the room that the plumbing needed repair. Naomi raised her hand once, then let it fall. The room stilled. The auctioneer blinked. "First bid, from the back." Someone murmured, "That the widow?" Another whisper, "Thought she vanished." The price rose slowly, but not far. Naomi did not flinch. She knew how much it was worth, and how little they believed she had. When the final call came, it was hers. Lot 114, paid in full. The silence that followed was the loudest moment of her year. Afterward, in the hallway, she passed 2 former in-laws. They did not recognize her at first. She wore no makeup, no silk, no sorrow. Just a wrap holding her daughter and a pair of boots dusted with work. Her sister-in-law stopped mid-stride. "You bought it?" she asked, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and fear. Naomi nodded. "Why?" the woman pressed. "After everything?" Naomi looked past her, toward the rain-streaked window. "Because it was never about the building," she said. "It was about what they could not burn down." "You think it will succeed again?" Naomi's answer was quiet. "It already has." She left before they could reply. The next few weeks passed like breath held between 2 moments. Naomi signed the final papers, held the keys in her palm again, walked through the old corridors. Dust clung to every surface. The mirrors were still cracked. A sign on the door read, "Closed" in faded red. But she saw it all as future. With Elijah's help, she pulled up warped floorboards, replaced the counters with shelves built from reclaimed wood. She scrubbed the back wall until the original tiling glinted beneath the grime. Her baby slept in a bassinet in the corner, rocked gently by vibrations from Naomi's careful hammering. And one night, beneath the humming glow of a single overhead bulb, Naomi opened a new panel in the van. The last. Inside it was a note, handwritten in familiar scrawl. "If you are reading this, it means you did not give up. I always knew you would not. But just in case the world forgot your worth, here's something to remind them." Beneath the paper, a final ingot, larger than any before. Heavy, untouched. Naomi did not cry. She simply wrapped it tightly, placed it in her oldest coat pocket, and stood in the center of her future store. She no longer needed gold to survive. She would use it now to thrive. The grand reopening was not grand. No ribbons, no headlines, no catered speeches or camera crews. Just a hand-painted sign in the window that read, "Now open, Isa and Rose," and the soft rustle of wind carrying the scent of lilies down the block. Naomi stood in the doorway with her daughter nestled close, Elijah at her side, his eyes bright but solemn. A fresh coat of green paint covered the doorframe, matched by golden lettering above the awning, clean, deliberate, and quietly proud. It was early, too early for customers, but Naomi had always believed in being present before she was needed. So she waited. Inside, the shop gleamed. Sunlight spilled through the tall front windows, catching vases of white tulips and wild chamomile. The counter was worn smooth by her own sanding. Behind it, shelves stood neatly stocked with satin ribbons, blank cards, and bundles of eucalyptus, all tied with twine. This was not a recreation of the past. It was a resurrection. The first customer was a man in work boots. He held a folded piece of paper with a list of flowers scribbled in shaky handwriting. His wife, he said, had loved calla lilies before her hands forgot how to hold them. Naomi assembled the bouquet without speaking, slipping in a single stem of Queen Anne's lace, delicate, lacy, like memory made visible. The man paid in cash, his eyes damp. "Thank you," he said. "You made it feel like more than flowers." Naomi only nodded. By noon, 3 more visitors had come. A young couple looking for centerpieces, a middle-aged woman in search of an apology, a teacher buying blooms for her graduating class. Each left with more than they expected. By evening, the shop smelled like early spring, even though fall had already begun to settle its hands over the city. Elijah counted bills at the counter with quiet precision, then looked up. "Do you think they'll come?" Naomi's hands stilled over a vase of hydrangeas. "They might," she said. And they did. Late afternoon brought them, 2 figures in tailored black, the same in-laws who had once handed her rust and rain and called it charity. They stepped through the door like people who no longer knew how to command a room. Her father-in-law's suit was looser than she remembered. His sister walked behind him, her heels hesitant against the shop's polished floor. "Naomi," he said, adjusting the cuff of his jacket. "This place, it looks different." "It is different," Naomi replied. He glanced at the arrangements along the wall, the painted logo, the handmade pricing cards. "You kept the name." She nodded. "It belongs to my children now." He cleared his throat. We've had some setbacks. Legal trouble. The last Carter location fell through. Investors walked. There's talk of liquidation." Naomi remained still. He continued. "We thought, perhaps, you might consider bringing us in. A partnership. Family business again. Like before." Like before. She heard the words and almost laughed, but her face remained calm. Behind her, Elijah stood motionless, watching. Naomi walked to the front counter. She picked up a small white box, an order she had packed earlier, and placed it between them. "You once told me the van was all I deserved," she said softly. "You laughed as you threw me into the rain." He shifted but said nothing. Naomi opened the box, revealing a single gold-plated key. "This shop," she continued, "was born from that van. From what you left behind, from what you thought was worthless." Her voice was not angry. It was steady, final. "There is no partnership here. There is no room for what you once were." Her sister-in-law looked toward the exit. Her father-in-law lingered, as if expecting mercy, recognition, anything that could tie him back to what he had lost. But Naomi had already severed that cord. "You taught me something valuable," she added. "That rust can be a disguise, that silence can hold power. That being underestimated is a gift." She gestured toward the door. He left without another word. The doorbell chimed softly behind them. Naomi turned back to the counter. Elijah exhaled, the kind of breath that had been held for far too long. "Will they come back?" he asked. "Maybe," she replied, "but we will not need to answer." That night, Naomi locked up and walked to the back lot. The van still sat beneath the leaning lamppost, unmoved, familiar. She approached slowly, fingers grazing the metal frame. The rust no longer felt like ruin. It felt like armor, like history. She opened the back door and stepped inside. The air was cold, tinged with old fabric and distant memory. In the corner, a folded note waited. She did not remember leaving it, but she knew who had. In her husband's handwriting, "You were always the gold." Naomi folded the paper and held it to her chest. Outside, the city moved without her. Inside, her story no longer whispered. It bloomed. The days grew shorter. Morning light arrived slower now, filtered through the brittle branches of the street trees, landing in long rectangles on the flower shop floor. Naomi stood at the work table, trimming stems by feel more than sight. Her daughter slept against her chest, wrapped tightly in soft linen. Her breathing, even and quiet, timed itself to the rhythm of scissors slicing through stems. The shop had grown, not large, never loud, but fuller, more alive. Customers returned now not just for flowers but for something else, a sense of being seen. There was a rhythm to the days. Elijah would open the blinds at 7. Naomi would light a lavender candle to cut the morning chill. Deliveries arrived by 8, and by 9, the bell on the door began its slow chorus of comings and goings. Yet on this morning, something was off. It began with the envelope. Thick, cream-colored, hand-delivered, no return address. Naomi turned it in her hands before slicing it open. Inside, an invitation. Civic Leadership Luncheon, honoring women in small business. Her name printed in bold across the center. She read it twice before setting it aside. Not with excitement, not with pride, but with wariness. Recognition had never come without cost. The next day, the mayor's office called. They wanted to feature Issa and Rose as a keynote example of post-crisis entrepreneurship. "You are an inspiration," the voice said. "A community symbol." Naomi listened, silent. "You rebuilt from nothing," the woman continued. "The city wants to recognize that." Naomi did not correct her, because she had not rebuilt from nothing. She had rebuilt from what no one else bothered to see. She agreed to attend, but requested no speech, just a seat at the table. That was enough. On the day of the luncheon, Naomi dressed in a navy blue coat and a pair of clean boots. No jewelry, no makeup, just her. Elijah offered to walk her to the building. As they approached the civic hall, people gathered outside, photographers, guests, men in jackets that gleamed under weak autumn sun. Naomi held tighter to the strap of her shoulder bag, where her daughter's blanket was folded in careful squares. Inside, chandeliers glittered overhead, tables dressed in linen, silver cutlery lined up with military precision. Her name sat on a place card near the center. She did not sit immediately. Instead, she walked the perimeter of the room, tracing the edges with her eyes, noting who glanced her way and who pretended not to see. At one table, she recognized two familiar faces, her former in-laws. They had not seen her yet. Their clothes were still sharp, but their posture had changed. Something in the spine, less rigid. Something in the eyes, less sure. She walked past them without pause. Let them see what resilience looked like when it refused to beg. The mayor took the podium, reading from a stack of prepared notes. Words like grit, determination, against all odds floated through the air like confetti. When Naomi's name was called, she stood. Applause rippled across the room, polite, hollow. She walked slowly toward the front, heels silent on the carpet. A man offered her a plaque. She accepted it with both hands, nodded once, and turned. But instead of returning to her table, she stepped to the edge of the stage, near the microphone. She did not plan to speak. But silence had never failed her. She waited, let the hush settle, then said only this: "I was never rebuilding from nothing. I was just protecting what you could not see." She stepped down. A woman in the front row rose quietly, clapping with reverence instead of pity. Then another. Naomi returned to her seat. The plaque sat heavy in her lap, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented: a reversal. She had once been cast out. Now she was seated at their table. Not out of invitation, but because she had earned it. After the luncheon, Elijah met her on the steps. He looked up at her, his coat zipped high against the wind. "You were the only one who didn't read from paper," he said. Naomi smiled. "The truth doesn't need a script." They walked home together. The wind picked up. Dry leaves danced across the sidewalk. As they passed the old parking lot, the one where the van had sat those many nights, Naomi paused. The space was empty now, paved over. Striped, erased. But she saw it clearly. Where they had slept, where they had cried, where the world had stopped pretending it cared, and she had started to care more than ever. Elijah looked at her. "You miss it?" he asked. Naomi glanced at the empty spot. "No," she answered. "I remember it. That is different." He nodded. At home, she placed the plaque at the back of the shop, not on display, not in a case, just on a shelf, between two vases. The customers did not ask about it. And she did not offer to explain. Because Issa and Rose had never been built for applause. It was built from quiet choices, from nights inside rusted walls, from the refusal to break, and from the truth that sometimes the deepest roots grow in silence. The first snow fell on a Tuesday, soft at first, then steady, blanketing the streets in quiet. It softened the edges of the city, muffling footsteps, coating storefronts, dusting the awning of Issa and Rose in white like powdered sugar over a secret. Inside the shop, the air was warm. Candles flickered near the windows. Eucalyptus bundles hung from copper hooks, drying slow and fragrant above the register. Naomi stood at the front window, one hand resting on her daughter's back as the baby slept against her chest. Elijah was seated nearby, folding craft paper into cones for holiday arrangements. He had grown taller, his fingers more certain. He moved like someone who had watched struggle and learned grace from it. A woman entered with snow in her hair and sorrow in her eyes. Her coat was buttoned unevenly. She held a frame in her hands, a photograph of her father. "His service is tomorrow," she whispered. "I do not want something big, just something that means something." Naomi took the frame and studied the face in the photo. Smiling eyes, weathered hands, a tie slightly askew. She nodded once. By afternoon, the bouquet was ready. pine, sage, white roses, and a single yellow carnation. "I added rosemary," Naomi said gently as she tied the ribbon, "for remembrance." The woman wept, quietly, then left, holding the arrangement like it might fall apart if anyone else touched it. Naomi stood in the silence that followed, her hands still on the table. She did not look at the door. She looked at her fingers. The same fingers that once scrubbed rust off a van at dawn. The same hands that turned scraps of nothing into warmth, and warmth into memory. A sound behind her, keys in the lock. She turned. Elijah stood with a delivery box, but behind him, someone else entered. A man in a gray coat, hair streaked with white. He carried no flowers, no order slip, just his presence. Naomi recognized him after a moment. The attorney, from the will reading. The last time she had seen him, he had been sitting behind a polished desk, expression blank as her life was stolen piece by piece. Now, he looked smaller, slower. He removed his gloves carefully and approached the counter. "I heard," he began, "what became of the shop." Naomi said nothing. He placed a folded document on the counter. "I reviewed the estate again. After all this time, it seemed necessary. I found discrepancies." Naomi raised her eyebrows slightly. He cleared his throat. "Your husband left you everything. Not just the van, not just the shares, but full ownership. The language was there, suppressed in later filings." A long pause. "I owe you an apology." Naomi did not speak. She did not nod. She simply reached into the drawer beneath the register, pulled out a small envelope, and slid it across the counter. He frowned. "What is this?" "Proof," she said, "of what I already knew." He opened it. Inside was a photocopy of her husband's original letter, the one he'd hidden in the van, the one with the line that changed everything. "If you are reading this, it means you did not give up." The attorney stared at it for a long moment, then looked up. "You knew." Naomi nodded once. "I did not need their permission to believe him." He left quietly. That evening, Naomi locked the shop, her daughter bundled tight in a hand-knit blanket. Elijah walked beside her, kicking small piles of snow with his boots. They passed the street where the old van used to sit. Nothing remained there now. No tire tracks, no shadow. But Naomi saw it anyway. The rusted shell. The flaking paint. The nights curled up in silence, one hand on her belly and the other on Elijah's back, keeping him warm with the only thing she had left, her presence. She reached into her coat pocket, where she now kept the last remaining flake of gold. Not for value, not for memory, but as a reminder that the most precious things are often wrapped in what the world throws away. They reached home, a small apartment above the flower shop, warm and lit with soft yellow light. On the door, a wreath of pine and dried oranges swayed gently in the wind. Naomi paused before opening it. She looked down at her children. Elijah, thoughtful, resilient. Her daughter, peaceful, growing. And she realized something. They were no longer surviving. They were rooted, blooming. And not because of the gold, not because of the revenge, but because of the choice to remain kind when cruelty had been easier, the decision to build instead of beg, to remember instead of resent. Inside, she set the gold flake on a windowsill, let the light catch it. Elijah turned off the shop lights below. The petals would rest tonight, and so would she, because now, finally, the van was behind them. But what it taught her would live forever.